I'm not in.
Oh, all right, thank you everyone for joining virtually and in person. I think we're just like waiting for a couple seconds while people stream in. People online, if there's any issues, if our video is a little choppy or if you can't hear us, please let us know in the chat. We'll try to make sure there's no tech issues happening today. But thank you everyone for joining. Just so everyone knows, this is a recorded session. Everyone in the room, thank you for being here today. My name is Malvika Randivi. I'm the programs manager here at SID United States, and I just wanted to start off by introducing the event with some housekeeping rules for today. The event, collaborative storytelling, participatory photography for learning, engagement, equity in environmental programs. This event is hosted by our Environment and Sustainability Work Group. Our co-chair is not able to attend today as he's traveling, but we have his blessing, so we appreciate that. And huge thank you to Environmental Incentives for bringing this event to us and participating. And with that, for anyone that's not familiar with SID United States, we are the largest and the most active chapter of the Society for International Development, which is an international network founded in 1957 to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. We serve as a global town square for the international development community, bringing together people from diverse organizations, disciplines, and career stages in a neutral, independent forum to share information and discuss important issues and challenges that are facing our community, as we are doing today. There are different ways that you can get involved with us. You can check out some of our upcoming events and sign up for a weekly newsletter and have a look at our newly designed website at SID-US.org. You can also apply to be a volunteer co-chair or work group associate. The Environment and Sustainability Work Group is currently looking for a co-chair, so I would highly recommend anyone in the group that is interested to apply. You can attend our virtual career fair on February 15th. You will find more information on our website. And finally, you can follow us on social media to keep in touch with all of our different activities. A few things to note for today's event. This is a recorded session, as I mentioned at the start, and it will be shared publicly through our different networks and social media channels. You can find our recording on YouTube after the event. Closed captioning is available, and you can start it from your own personal settings. If you have any questions for our speaker today, please post them in the chat box, and we will try to make sure to get to it during the Q&A part of the event. Just a quick mention of who our co-chair is currently for the Environment and Sustainability Work Group, Adrian Bliss, and also our work group associate, Alex Wagner. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator for today, Amy Gambrill, who is also a former co-chair with the Environment and Sustainability Work Group. So we're very happy to have you here, Amy. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Malvika. Welcome everybody in the room, and welcome to those of you online. We are really excited. Oh, I just got kicked out.
Oh no.
It keeps kicking me out too.
You can keep going. I'm very excited to be here today as a portfolio lead at Environmental Incentives. I got to first work with Jason Houston back in 2017, and I've enjoyed following his career. Today, we will be talking about participatory photography, an approach that asks not just whose stories we tell, but who tells those stories, and how they see and share their perspectives. So I'll introduce Jason. Jason Houston is an international photojournalist and filmmaker whose career has been dedicated to exploring human experience and the environment in the world's most vulnerable places. Jason and his wife, Dewi, work as 816 Creative, a visual storytelling company representing a deep love and concern for racial justice, indigenous-centered voices and animist worldviews, and the rebalancing of humanity's relationships with Earth and each other. Over the last few years, they have also been exploring issues of equity, authorship, and agency in collaboration with the people in front of their cameras. Jason and Dewi recently photographed and filmed and led the participatory photography workshops for USAID's Measuring Impact 2 project in the Philippines, Peru, and Madagascar. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Let me see one last time if I can get on Zoom here, actually. Keeps kicking me off, sorry, so may just, yeah. I will just go ahead and start. So if I talk, even though Zoom's not on.
Yep, should be good. We have the camera. Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amy. And thank you everyone who's joining us here today. this work comes from a deep personal commitment of my own to show up in the world the way that I want the world to be. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share it with you all and also to hear your feedback as well. I'll give a little bit more background on myself for context. I've worked, sorry, I'm preoccupied by Zoom. Let me try one last time. Nope, I'll let it go. So I've worked as a photojournalist for my entire career. And in that role, I've always considered myself a concerned photographer, which is a term that means that my intention is to affect positive change with the stories that I work on. And that that intention also drives all of my work. And so also as a longtime NGO photographer as well, I've always believed that authentic, truthful storytelling is critical, both ethically and practically, to doing our cause-driven work from an honest place and in ways that will truly matter in the world. And then, because of the subjects that I've chosen to photograph recently, things like communities dealing with illegal gold mining and narco activity in the Amazon, or fisheries in Asian and African seas, the other reality for me is that I've always been involved in telling other people's stories. And usually it's of people who live far away from me and who are very different than me. And this is something that's become increasingly uncomfortable for me. And so for the last few years, and especially through the pandemic with my own international travel shut down for a couple of years, I've been asking myself a lot, what really is the best and most effective way to create meaningful and impactful stories? And one answer that we've come up with are these story collaborative workshops, like we did this last year with USAID. And those are building on the idea and history of traditional participatory photography programs like Photo Voice and things like that you might have heard of. But they're also further adapted to this super visual world that we now live in and the ubiquity of photography in everyday life and things like phones and social media and stuff like that. And we've been developing these workshops over the past few years with folks like the Nature Conservancy, WWF, and RARE, and a handful of other socially and environmentally focused organizations who are interested in doing things differently. And so the idea behind these is that as journalists, as aid organizations, as conservation groups, we have a long history of going into communities that are not our own and doing good work and with good intentions, but the stories that we tell about all this and how we talk about it and how we communicate about it, those things that define what we know and what we believe about all of that are also usually outsiders' stories. And that is because we're usually the outsiders in that situation. And at best, this ignores the local people's agency to tell their own stories, and it misses out on local and indigenous wisdom. But at worst, it can also be harmful and actually perpetuate systems that have kept these communities out of the conversations about the future of people and nature and about their roles in that future. If we're going to effectively learn from and work with people and communities that are different than us, then we have to value things like equity and diversity. And if we're talking about storytelling, then that's done by recognizing authorship, by checking what representation is looking like, and ultimately by honoring story sovereignty for people who are parts of those stories. Not only is this just the right thing to do, but there are also practical reasons that we should do this too. No understanding is expanded and no problem is solved well by sticking with your initial assumptions and ignoring different relevant perspectives. And so the reward for including the local communities and embracing all of this diversity is better, more nuanced, informed, and a more complete understanding of whatever the story is that we need to be hearing at the time. Not to mention that our working relationships will also always be made better when we work to break down the systemic supremacies and take the time to actually just listen to each other as equals. My industry, photojournalism, is heavily dominated by white males based in the Western world and living in the Northern Hemisphere. Basically, it's people just like me, and it's designed in every way to for people like me to succeed. And so to change this, to help manifest the kind of world that I want to live in, we and I have to make efforts like this to actively work and get clients and their audiences and the systems that we all work in to give diverse storytellers a chance and to learn to value them in ways and honor their stories they have to share. My role in all of this is to open up that world that I have access to, and so that those voices can be more powerfully and more broadly heard as part of the conversations. I'm going to try one last quick time to get into Zoom because before I talk a little bit about how these workshops are actually structured, I want to run a slideshow, if I can, of some of the photographers' work, and I think that'd be important. So let me see if I can really quickly do that.
And while Jason is doing that, I'd encourage you to send any questions you have in the chat. We'll be taking them in the room and we'll be taking them in the chat after Jason makes his presentation.
Just spinning. Okay, well, there will be some resources that will be circulated as part of this presentation, including a document that we've been working on that outlines a lot of the structure and thinking behind the workshops. Included in that document is a 2-page gallery section that includes a lot of photographs from the photographers that we've worked with in different places around the world, and celebrate some of the best photographs there. So that'll be one place where folks can see that. And then we'll also shortly, I will have a video that will also that I can share that shares the experience of these workshops, but also features some of the photography from some of the photographers. So at least we'll have that because my Zoom is just spinning here. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of these workshops. These collaborations are not typical photography workshops. We're not teaching photography or teaching them how to be photographers. We're simply providing some basic tools, some essential technical support, and a little bit of framework that's more designed to facilitate the creation and sharing of meaningful stories by promoting photography as a tool for self-expression and a catalyst for community conversations. The equipment that we provide is simple and it's designed to meet the photographers where they at, not be distracting with too many buttons to learn about. But it's also intended to provide opportunity for realistic next steps in creative and communications capabilities and capacities for the communities. So in communities without computers, for example, smartphones that can make photographs might be a better option because they can access the photographs much more easily. Or in coastal or jungle communities, we provide durable waterproof cameras. And that can be critically important to making sure that those cameras last and continue to be usable. So the goal then is to provide equipment that will be functional and that will be functional and have lasting value after we leave the community. So we're leaving some capacity behind. As far as the running of the workshops, it's also really important that we prompt and direct the photographers as little as possible. We recognize that now making photographs is familiar and it's no longer the sort of exclusive domain of professionals or technically trained artists. It's and too much structure and too much expectation around the making of the photograph itself can be intimidating and can stifle the natural creativity. And so we want the photographers to be making the photographs that they want to make and making them in the ways that they want to make them. And because of that, because we're trying to meet the participants where they're at and trying to adapt to what the community really needs, every program is different. And that's part of the design too. But the workshops that we did this last time for USAID all lasted about a week and shared a basic structure, which I'll just go over in quick summary here. We start with a community introduction. This is a really important step to introduce ourselves to the community, to ask permission to be working in the community, to allow the community to ask any questions about what we're doing, and also to make sure that the community understands that bringing all of these cameras in and an external audience into their community has potential risks and could potentially be harmful as well. And so making sure that people understand what it means, especially in communities that don't experience a lot of photography, that they understand what it means to have their lives documented for a while. We do a photographer orientation, which again is just the basics on using the cameras, whichever we've chosen, but then also aligning expectations and starting to hear from the photographers what they want the workshop to look like. So it's less about giving an overview of what we're going to be doing that week and more about collaborating to figure out what we want that week to look like. Throughout the process, and again, depending on how the community works and how everyone works together, we do group or individual check-ins. Sometimes there's very little of that if people are off and running and happy doing the work on their own. Other times it's opportunities to help make sure that they get back on course, or even to work with them to actually learn about photography if that's something that the different individuals want to do. Then there's a final presentation at the end, which is whichever way they want to share their photographs back with their community. And so that involves some editing, and there's a lot of sort of juggling to figure out what technology and what processes will work best for people who are not used to dealing with a higher volume of photographs. And so again, very different in a lot of different situations. Sometimes it involves printing things out. Sometimes it involves a lot of looking over shoulders on computers and stuff, but we go through all of the photographs, help them prepare the presentations that they want to share back with their community. And then we have a final presentation in some form. Sometimes it's a slideshow, sometimes it's an exhibition. Oftentimes it's a combination of that. Okay, so to wrap this up, I had a few final reflections of my own, but this morning we received video from Maria Abregon, who works with EI and who worked as a community liaison for me in Philippines. It was really helpful. She worked as a translator, worked to help make sure that we just administered everything, but as someone who is Filipina, to help connect to the community there. So she played a really important role, and she sent over a video with some of her reflections on that experience. So I will save a little bit of time and grant that to her. But actually, before her video, let's run the behind the scenes one, the other one, yeah. So before Maria's video, we'll run a behind the scenes video that looks at the experiences across the 3 sites and sort of gives a sense of what that process feels like. I'll show you a little bit of the photographer's photographs, and then we'll run Maria's video after that. So thank you. We'll go into questions and answers after the videos. With this workshop, we're going to try something a little bit different, and we're going to work together. So what we're doing is called participatory photography. So the idea is, I'm not telling you what to photograph, I'm not telling you what story to tell, it's up to you, but I'm here to just help that process.
Para sí, allá, sí. Sí, fotos, sí, pruebas, sí. Sí tenemos como vivir nosotros. Sí es bueno. Si nosotros no tenemos eso, digamos, si nosotros no hacemos utilizamos la cámara de fotografía, o sea, es una persona o nosotros como personas, nosotros tenemos que saber nuestra realidad, mostrarle a cualquier institución de que venga, nuestra realidad es Yo no vengo, acá está.
When taking photographies, we realized the good things that has improved in his life. They got something good and they should share also because they are one community. They are just one people, one community, and the other people should have advantage of what they have also.
Seeing some of your photographs, I had them in my head.
It wasn't really busy.
Dito pala.
The top shot in T.
Let's just give all the participants another round. All right, good. So actually, I think my Zoom is now working. I hotspotted to my phone, so. We can run Maria's video now and she'll have some comments on her sort of reflections on being part of the first workshop we ran in the Philippines.
All right. So, hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm honored to be invited to speak at this event. My name is Maria Bragan, and I work at Environmental Incentives, which is a US-based company dedicated to environmental conservation and international development. So last year, I supported a community participatory photography in the Philippines. And the purpose of the activity is to document and share the experiences and perspectives of the community on biodiversity conservation and USAID's investment in the area. So my role involved serving as a community liaison, working with fish right implementing partners, the photojournalist Jason and Dewi, and the 6 incredible community members who participated in the collaborative photography process. And as a community liaison, I played a crucial role in facilitating communication. So I translated between 3 different languages. I helped foster positive relationships and promote collaboration between the community members or participants, the implementing partners, and the photojournalist. So the community we work with in the Philippines is a coastal community who received technical assistance from USAID to establish and manage a marine protected area called Siete Pecados Marine Park. And my impression of the community based on the photos that I've seen and the stories that I've heard is that this particular local community has a very strong sense of ownership and accountability for the marine park and for the different conservation and livelihood efforts that they're engaged with in their own community. So this sense of ownership and accountability to take care of their environment, their livelihoods, their family, and their children is so evident in their photos and stories. In fact, one of the participants, a very admirable community leader, Mr. Jojo, who is the park manager of Siete Pecados, he shared about the struggles and the success of establishing the Siete Pecados as a marine protected area way back many years ago. And through the photos that he took of his community of the marine park and fish or fishery, Jojo encouraged his community and the neighboring communities who watched the presentation to do the same thing as well, and to take inspiration from the Siete Pecados transformation and from their community's transformation. So, at that moment, Mr. Jojo took the opportunity to raise awareness and also share his sense of pride by, kind of reminding everyone of their own local history, of their efforts, the challenges, and their own transformative change. So that sense of pride that I sensed from him and from the community was truly inspiring. And seeing that made me really realize how important community engagement is, and most especially community ownership. Through this experience, I also learned the importance of just listening, listening to the perspectives and stories of local communities and learning from their motivations and experiences. There were many moments throughout the activity where I felt moved and motivated and inspired. One particular moment was when I was talking to one of the participants who is a mother and a community volunteer who helps with fish catch monitoring. So I remember asking her what inspires her to do what she does, and she shared that her drive really stems from a desire to secure a better life for her children. She expressed concern about a future where her children might no longer see fish in the ocean. And she also said that she wants to serve as a good example for her children to inspire them to actively participate in the community. And as she was saying this, she got really emotional and started crying. And I started crying with her as well. And, I think what she told me and how she felt at that moment is not something that will easily be captured in project reports or academic research paper or the more formal traditional reporting of that we do in development world. And this is why listening to them and giving to the local community and giving them the agency to tell their own stories and share their own experiences, their own narratives is really, really important. It was also great to see the community members getting excited about using the photos that they took. Just want to note that they fully own the pictures and they can use them however they like. And while taking the photos, many of them were already thinking about how they could use them in their work. So like raising awareness among tourists about the marine park, using the pictures to monitor the growth of mangroves, so on and so forth. So the fact that they're thinking and planning to use their own photos instead of someone else's who visit their community, really shows that they have the power, or they feel empowered to shape their own narratives or their own future. And yeah, so I think reflecting on my experience, I have a few key recommendations for the development sector on effectively engaging with local communities in development initiatives. First one is avoid imposing external values, ideas, or solutions, and instead really work collaboratively with the community to incorporate their perspectives into the development initiative. So one thing that was very important in the participatory photography process is giving the participants the freedom to explore. We provided them very limited guidance or instructions, and really we encourage them to take whatever photos they want to share whatever stories they want to share. And this really allowed them to express themselves in a very authentic manner. And really enjoyed the process as well. So many of them were really grateful that they were able to use this process or this photography process to explore and to express themselves. And one woman, I recall, she even said that it was nice to share her story, express herself without using too much word, because she's not used to public speaking or sharing her thoughts vocally. Another recommendation is to collaborate and build partnership with local community leaders to build trust and credibility within the community to get community buy-in. So encouraging local leaders to take ownership of projects, really fostering and build that sense of pride and responsibility within the community, and prioritize genuine and inclusive community participation in all aspects of decision-making processes, from planning of the project to implementation and, to closing out and thinking about sustainability. The third one and the last one, because this video is getting long, one is to regularly consult with the local communities and assess the impact of initiatives, not just in terms of quantitative metrics, but also qualitative measures that reflect the overall community's well-being. So I think the participatory photography is just one tool that helps facilitate that. But of course, there are more, such as town hall meetings, focus group discussions, interviews, surveys, so on and so forth. But really, the point is that it's so important to invest some resources in community engagement, and prioritize and promote locally led development, because these are really key to achieve transformative change and long-term sustainability. So yeah, before I end my piece, I just want to say that real change comes when we recognize and we amplify the voices of those directly affected or those directly involved in development initiatives. So yeah, thank you for your time and this opportunity to share my thoughts and experience. Have a great rest of your day.
That was great. I have to say, I loved seeing Maria's cat. Hope everybody else is. Cat fan over here. Thank you so much to both you and Maria for sharing this with us. So I'll just start with one question, which is, was there, for you, Jason, was there a particular experience that led to your awareness of these issues in your work? What inspired you to make this change to participatory photography?
Yeah, I've always working as a photojournalist, very aware of ethical practice, and I've always tried to act ethically. But I was doing an assignment for Nature Conservancy for the Nature Conservancy magazine, and it was to do a profile on a program in a First Nations community in Canada. And when we first reached out to the community, the response was, yeah, we don't need another white guy to come in and tell our story for us. And I got that. I understood it, and went back to them and said, like, you know, totally. The program, the article was on a high school internship for Native youth who were going to look at balancing economic development through ecotourism with Western conservation with their traditional heritage, and trying to figure out how to put all that together. And I said, you know, one thing that could potentially be helpful for them would be to get some mentorship around communication. So why don't, instead of me telling the story, why don't I come up and mentor some of these high school students and see if I can help them learn to use cameras and learn to communicate in those ways. And then if we get along, if there's value in it and I can stay and do the story, great. If not, I'll take off after that and leave. And so that was kind of the first experience experimenting with all of that. And then it's come up multiple times since then, sometimes with more of a programmatic learning angle to it, sometimes with much more of a community engagement and involving, and sometimes very much with moral and ethical focus.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's, I think that it sounds like they did you a little bit of a favor there.
Yeah, honesty is always, when someone's directly honest with you, it's always a favor.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, okay, let's get into it a little bit. How do you go about identifying the participants for your workshops?
The way we're doing these workshops is we're not fully independent. We're working with a host. And so the various roles that are involved in this is, you know, I'll play a facilitator role. I work with my wife who also does that, and then also does a lot of behind the scenes work. So she did the whole video that everyone saw. But we also have a community liaison, which is somebody like the role that Maria played, but it's somebody who has relationships in the community and can help us navigate some of the more cultural sensitivities and things like that. And then importantly, we have the host. And the host is in the structure that we're working in right now is the local organization that wants to bring this to the dynamics that they share with the community. And so usually the host is helping to select the participants, and we guide them to look for diversity in things like age and gender and different experiences throughout the community. But because of that, we're actually getting a little bit of a filter of people who are on board and understand what some of the issues are and stuff. So it's not entirely independent. That's important to point out. But the flip side of that, and what that allows, is for us to be very, very non-directive in exactly what we ask them to do, because we know that there are already some alignment. So the host isn't terribly concerned about things being exposed that they're terrified by. Yeah, so it's a collaborative effort, and what we did in each of these cases is the local organization that was acting as the host would propose a dozen people or so, and we sort of look at that mix and talk about it. One of the other important things about the participating photographers is that that they nominate themselves and volunteer as opposed to being nominated. And that's something that we had to work out carefully with the host, because the host oftentimes, you know, wanted to try out their flagship folks, and then you're asking someone to do a favor for you, and that creates the wrong dynamic in all of this. We want people who are enthusiastic about exploring what this could mean creatively, and yeah, because otherwise they just try to, you know, if they're doing a favor, they'll come back and try to tell you what they think about here. Try to get past that.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like in each location, whether it's the Philippines, Peru, or Madagascar, that it likely presented unique cultural contexts. So, you know, how did you and your team adapt your approach, other than, you know, having sort of a Maria type support, you know, to ensure cultural sensitivity and relevance, you know, in each setting?
Yeah, the liaison plays a huge role in assuring cultural sensitivity. You know, we give them full veto power over anything we ask them to translate, and expect them to push back if we start doing something that's inappropriate. So that's one safety that we have. Each of the locations were very different. In this case, programmatically, they were different. In Philippines, there were 20 years of programs that had been happening between some version of the local host and the community had been involved in for decades. In Peru, they were very involved and savvy and knew what was going on, but they hadn't been doing it for very long. And then in Madagascar, we were dealing with communities that had just been introduced and were just getting off the ground as far as the work that they were doing. So that also created some differences with, I guess those differences, they felt cultural in some sense because we were seeing how the different communities were going through their leadership transitions and things like that, how they were stepping into those leadership positions and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, not sure that totally answered the question.
No, it did. I mean, it definitely sounds like it was important to identify those liaisons, you know, to really help you navigate it.
And flexibility. Flexibility is essential in all of this. You know, we have the basic structure and stuff, but we really had to be willing to break any of those rules if necessary. And when the photographers, they wanted to step up and get involved in the process in any way, we always stepped back and allowed that. So as soon as they felt ready to take over any aspect of it, they did. That was really important.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, storytelling, at least to me, it's an essential part of our purpose-driven work. And so how does this more collaborative approach fit with more traditional professional contexts?
Yeah, I have colleagues who think I'm crazy because I'm just like, they think I'm, you know, training others to replace me or like out of, you know, run out of work or whatever. I think the way I see it is a lot like I saw, I mean, there's a couple things. One is, you know, we've been through these transitions before with digital photography, making photography, the learning curves in photography a lot easier. And then, you know, quality of images a lot easier. You know, when photography was founded in the 1800s, like everyone was terrified that it was going to replace painting because no one needed to paint portraits anymore and stuff. So things just change and evolve. You know, what this allows me personally is for me to focus on the parts of the story that I want to tell because someone else is telling other parts of the story and they're telling the parts of the story that are more appropriate for them and less appropriate for me to try to tell. And then I can focus on the things. And so it actually becomes more of a collaborative, layered approach where I can look at it from an outsider's perspective, which has value but is incomplete. And they can look at it from a insider's perspective, oftentimes amateur and sometimes somewhat naive and in a non-judgmental use of that word. And together it creates a more nuanced and layered approach, which I think is actually really valuable. So it's actually in some ways not replaced the work I've done, but it's added to and freed up more creative and more appropriate explorations that I can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So building on that and building on something Maria said, where she was saying that you can't find that emotion or that perspective in a report. You know, that really hit me, you know, if you're hearing those stories. So you're going to tell your story one way and they're going to tell theirs. What are some ways you've seen them use photos? It sounds like they own the photos, they get to do with the photos what they want, or what are some ways you have seen them use them? Yeah, I mean, there are a number of practical ways that they've used them. As Maria said, Jojo, the park manager, was thinking about it as promoting tourism, documenting the biodiversity recovery of the park and things like that. You know, some of the coolest thing is the much less tangible stuff, the conversations that happen in the community. While we were doing these 3 trips with USAID, we were also doing a series of workshops with WWF, and so we were sort of actually alternating as we were traveling and stuff. We did one in Namibia with the San community that was very aware of, but also struggling with
trying to stay connected to their cultural identity and some of the traditional uses of plants and the medicine healing and things like that they're working on, other ancestral traditions. And some of the comments that came back to us from the photographers, one was by the traditional healer's wife, who said, prior to this, we were, occasionally having conversations around our ancestors. And now it's been, because of this project and throughout this project, it's been almost a nightly discussion. And so it brought that alive. There was another young woman who was was taken away as a student to be a babysitter in the city, and then had returned in her early 20s to the community, was relearning the language, relearning a lot of traditional stuff there. And she said that by working with other people to photograph this and working with the traditional healer, who was also one of the photographers, and they were all working together, she was learning so much more quickly about this stuff. And she was actually starting to think like, wow, maybe I can use this to preserve and document some of this information too. So you had an older man, a traditional healer who probably wasn't the type to make a book, and then you had a young woman who had some experience in the big city who thought that might be a good idea. So really special collaborations I don't think you would have seen otherwise. And that was entirely them. You didn't have to orchestrate that at all.
Oh, that sounds incredible.
Yeah. Very cool.
You mentioned in your video, there was one photo of a boat with a dog in it. I think all of us saw that one. Tell me a little bit more about the photographer.
Yeah, Elias. So he was 65 years old. His birthday actually happened. His 65th birthday actually happened during the workshop. He was a fisherman most of his life and had recently become involved in the marine protected area there as a ranger. And so as he was sort of retiring from fishing, he was working as a ranger, and he was becoming a true advocate for the marine conservation efforts there. Loved sharing all of that. He was a fisherman because he loved the ocean, and he saw what was happening in the protected area and loved sharing it with the tourists and all of that. So he had never used a camera before. We got them all waterproof cameras so they could do the underwater photography. Almost all of that beautiful underwater photography was his. He just I don't even and this happens every now and then. There'll be somebody who is just such a natural photographer that it does feel like it could put me out of business. He was awesome. He really did some amazing underwater photographs. And he also had a really creative, conceptual sensitivity to making the photographs. He had another photograph that was this almost abstract line of buoys cutting through the water, and his story around that, and he said it more eloquently than I can, but his story around that was that this represented this boundary where on one side people acted one way and thought one way, and on the other side people acted one way and thought another way. And it was about the tension in his community between conservation and the conservation mindset and the more extractive, fisheries, take all you can mindset. So
Wow.
it's cool.
I'm going to hold on to that.
Yeah, it's great.
That's incredible. So, okay, we're finally getting some questions through. My apologies to people tuning in. I don't have very good connection. So tell me a little bit more how you handled issues around documenting consent of the photo subjects. It's something I know we deal with in our work all the time. And did you train the participants on these issues? How did that work?
Yeah, we handled consent as carefully as we possibly can, and with a lot of multiple layers. So we have traditional release forms that we try to get used in everyone who's photographed. That's really difficult when you're sending photographers from the community out into their own community. With that, we just work very closely with the photographers to make sure that everyone, including, and that's part of why we have the community meeting in the beginning too, is to make sure that everyone understands that there will be cameras there and understands what people will be doing and understands that they can say no. And so consent is tacit and implicit in a lot of those cases. But the photographers know that they should ask. And in most cases they do. And some of the ones are very proud of the fact that they asked everyone, and will make sure to tell me that, when we download and look at the photographs. I also, as we're looking at the photographs, I make sure that if anything comes up that might be at all controversial, that might represent somebody in a way that they're not comfortable with, I have a conversation individually about each and every one of those photographs with the photographer and make sure. And we've pulled some photographs that we were uncertain about, especially when we're dealing with children, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's just continuing to check in on that. The other thing though is that apart from presentations like this, where we're directly referencing the workshop, we don't have any usage licensing on the photographs. It's all going back to it case by case, one by one, if we wanted to use them. That goes for the host organizations, it goes for the sponsors like USAID and everybody else. So the photographs are entirely owned and entirely controlled by the photographers themselves. There's no licensing other than direct relationship to promotion of the workshop approach.
Thanks. That sounds like glad you were able to talk through that and
Yeah,
put those issues in front. So probably last two questions or so. Have you kept up with the communities? And do you follow what they've done?
we try to, and in some cases, there are community members that we're able to keep in touch with. A lot of times they're very remote. There are big language barriers, and so it's difficult. The other thing is like personally, I really want to stay in touch with them, but it's also, and we do, and there are personal connections, but it's also intended that we step back. It's intended that we not like continuing to input into the community. And so we really try in that week that we're there to get them up and running and then leave and let them go. But I did get a message just the other day from a guy in Mexico who was just checking in, and
Oh, that's nice.
he was one of our great photographers too.
And do you ever encounter any challenges in the workshops? Are there any things you've sort of learned as you go?
The biggest thing is just checking my own personal desire to interact and learn from these photographers. Once the liaison is up and running and really kind of gets the flow of the process, once the photographers take ownership over the process and interacting with their community on their own, I become less and less necessary. And so to constantly interrupt with translations and a translator and things like that can just be disruptive. And so sometimes, as much as I want that, or I want to hear how it's going and get the testimonials from them, and that is kind of very type A Western things that Capricorns like me do. Yeah, then it's
Sure.
so that's one of the biggest challenges. Yeah, that and language, because we're talking about abstract expression of things that are important to them, and so language is always something we're trying to be really careful to have good translators and stuff.
Right. So before I ask my final question, I just want to open it up to the room. Does anybody here?
That's our
Yeah, thanks. A really great, really interesting presentation. And I really think we need to avoid the northern gaze in development photography and this whole stuff, the poverty porn aspects of it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the approaches that gets at that is this participatory collaborative type of stuff. And I've done a little bit of work working with kids and lending kids cameras and seeing what they can produce. And it's, as they say, eye-opening. But the question I wanted to ask, suppose the community wants to tell a story that the government or the donor or the organization doesn't want to hear.
Mm-hmm. It's a risk that the host and the sponsors take. My take on it is no censorship. And so if that's part of the dynamic and that's something that needs to be discussed, that's something that's important to the community, then that should be a part of the conversations around the support that we're providing to that community. I think it's really that simple. We did have one community that wanted to get very political with some of the stuff they were doing. They actually we weren't doing video, but they wanted to produce a video that was very political, and that's outside of what USAID is allowed to get involved in. So we were very careful. We actually very careful to figure out how to help them do that without, getting me arrested on the way home or whatever happens when you cross USAID. But and occasionally there's smaller censorship issues. Like we just recently there's an image from Peru of a young girl holding a howler monkey. Important connection for a lot of those communities to the forest is the pets that they harvest from the wildlife in the area, and things like that can be misleading when they're out of context or when the context isn't appreciated. So even though this photograph is being used in the context of this photographer's work and some explanation of the process itself, some people don't want to use that photograph, which I understand, but it also feels a little bit like censorship. So it comes up occasionally. Yeah, but
because to me, we need to really be clear about public relations versus communication for development.
Right.
I mean, the public relations side of stuff is us talking to Congress or something like that, and that's a whole different ballgame than doing communication for development. But you've done some wonderful work and you've helped people develop stories. Have those actually changed projects? Have that changed the dynamics of projects?
Yeah, I think in qualitative ways, yes, the photographers are enthusiastic about it. They're doing it actively, and they're doing that on behalf and within their community. And so I think I trust that there's impact there. We're very careful not to say that this process will impact this result or address this issue, because those are promises you can't make in this case. But you know, the community that wanted to get political was the one in Peru. They wanted to talk to their government about the land title application that was being stalled. And so they made the video, they did that. I know they also did make some more photographs and started reaching out to their government directly rather than through some of the organizational liaisons that they'd been working with in the past, and they did get land title. Whether or not those things are full cause and effect and directly related, I don't know, but they recognized their power. I won't say they were empowered, but they recognized their power and took advantage of it. That's great as part of the process, I think.
Thanks so much. I think as we probably unfortunately need to wrap up, I'd like to talk with you for another hour. What an important topic, and really hope everybody has gotten a sense of this powerful approach to storytelling and community engagement. So Jason and Maria, thank you so much. I know I'm inspired to think differently about, especially story sovereignty. I think that concept is one I'm going to chew over. And I really did learn from Maria, as she noted, that real change happens when we recognize and amplify the voices of the people directly affected by or directly involved in development. So especially to a room full of mostly implementing partners, I'm hoping more of us can introduce this approach into our work. And I'll note one last thing. As a former SID co-chair, I do encourage one of you to volunteer to be a co-chair. It's a very rewarding experience, and it's fun to be back in this chair. So please check out Jason's work. We actually have a gallery walk here in person, and I hope you can find it. I assume we'll put out some links online. And thank you for joining us today. It's really interesting.